online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 1, I'm Manila Dami. A humiliating end to England's Ashes as Australia win on the third day of the third test.
Of course, people should remain cautious as we approach New Year celebrations.
No new COVID rules for England before the new year, but the government urges people to stay safe. And a small plane crashes into a residential area in San Diego, killing everyone on board. It's been a humiliating end to the Ashes for England's cricketers as they lost the series on just the third day of the Melbourne Test this morning. Joe Root's side were all out for just 68 runs in their second innings. It's their lowest total in Australia for 117 years.
Disappointed. You turn up today and you walk out to bat with Ben Stokes and you feel like anything's possible. I can't be selfish and start thinking about myself.
The government will not introduce any new COVID restrictions in England this year, despite a record rise in cases over the weekend and the highest level of hospitalisations since March. Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have placed limits on large gatherings. In England, the Health Secretary has instead urged people to stay safe.
Of course, people should remain cautious as we approach New Year celebrations and, take a lateral flow test if that makes sense. Celebrate outside if you can. Have some ventilation indoors if you can.
An investigation is underway after a small plane crashed in a residential part of San Diego, killing everybody on board. No one was hurt on the ground, according to the Sheriff's Department. And teenagers whose parents smoke are 4 times more likely to take up the habit, according to a new government campaign. The Better Health Smoke Free initiative is using the research to encourage smokers to give up in the new year. That's all your live news on Talk Radio TV. Goodbye.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome, good afternoon. It's Tice Talk. It's 1:03 on a midday. I'm standing in for Ian Collins for the next 3 days. Great to have your company. It's a huge honour to be standing in for Ian whilst he's taking some days of well-earned rest. Well, looking outside here of Talk Radio Towers, it is grey, it is blustery, but I hope that you're having a great Christmas period. We've got a fantastic 3 hours lined up, and I want to hear from you with your views, your thoughts. Have you had a great Christmas? What was your best and worst moment? Great cracker jokes, disastrous Christmas cooking. If you've got some great stories, share it with us. We are, of course, here in England. If you're listening in England, I suppose we should be grateful to certain parts of either the government or Tory MPs, the fact that we can still enjoy hospitality and we can still party on New Year's Eve. But we're going to be talking to people from Wales in respect to what's going on there, or Scotland or Northern Ireland, because frankly, if you're in those countries, then you've got to come to England to party on New Year's Eve. We're obviously going to be talking about whether or not you fear restrictions in the new year. Give us a call to talk about that. We've got to talk about more COVID restrictions, what's going on with Omicron, but also what's going on with the energy prices, which are reaching record levels. And I have to tell you, I fear we ain't seen anything yet. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the abuse of certain of the illegal migrants coming across the channel who are claiming to be children in order to get more benefits. And we're going to be talking about language. Yes, you're not a postman, you're not a postwoman, you're a postal operative. Really? So that and much, much more. We've got some great guests to discuss all of this. And I want your views, your thoughts, your inputs. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. And you can watch to enjoy that. Stay with us. It's a great show. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
And a huge welcome. Good afternoon. Delighted to be standing in for Ian Collins this afternoon. And firstly, we need to talk about the COVID restrictions and where we are. Because in, I suppose, credit where credit's due, some people have given credit to Sajid Javid and the Prime Minister, but I actually think that credit's due to the 101 Tory MPs who voted against the restrictions back just before Christmas, because they're the ones that put real concern into the Prime Minister. I think they're the ones that we should thank for the fact that we haven't got more restrictions here. But I want to hear from you. Do you fear that we've got more restrictions coming next week after the new year? Tell us your thoughts. Or do you think that actually Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, they've got their judgments wrong in terms of imposing much higher restrictions, in terms of banning parties and gatherings on New Year's Eve? Tell us what you think. 0344 499 1000. All of this despite Scotland's hospitalisations falling and their ICU numbers being the lowest for 5 months. What's going on? Is it Nicola Sturgeon just being a control freak? But there is good news as well here in England, across the whole of the UK actually. The case numbers in the last few days are down 20%. And based on what we've seen in South Africa, let's hope that trend continues. And here's some more good news. Actually, the numbers in ICUs across the whole of the UK are the lowest since mid-October. Yes, the lowest since mid-October, way before the arrival of the latest variant, Omicron. And that actually, what that shows is that there are shorter stays in hospital, there are better treatments. All of these positives that real leaders, quality leaders, would use to set things in context. And actually, the ICU numbers are better also than the period from late July to late September. Do we hear this good news from anybody? Doesn't seem like it. Context and leadership is so important. And whilst every death is sad, the reality is that in the last 7 days, deaths have been less than in the previous week. Now, do you remember, I'll just cast your mind back to a year ago yesterday. Yes, the 27th of December 2020. The headline on the front of the Daily Mail was 15 million jabs to freedom, and the Chancellor writing that we'd get our freedoms back and 2021 was going to be a great year. Well, here we are, a year later. We're 131 million jabs later. And yet, we still almost have to be grateful that our Prime Minister and Tory MPs have said that actually in England we don't have to have certain restrictions. And already there's talk of a fourth jab, in other words a second booster for many, which we're seeing in, for example, Israel. They're well down the road of the fourth jab. Here's another stat for you. 390 million tests later. So we're approaching 400 million tests. We're testing 1.5 million people a day. I think we're the biggest testing nation probably in the world, certainly in continental Europe. Is this a good use of taxpayers' money? 1.5 years, almost 2 years into this crisis? Do you think your money is being well spent? My concern is that there are so many people making so much money out of this. In a sense, if you just follow the money, then you can see what's going on. And there are many people who want this crisis, this testing, this jabbing, to go on for as long as possible. We've got pro-lockdown scientists who slightly disappointed with the Prime Minister deciding not to impose more restrictions, they're now looking to change their language so that we're not allowed to refer to restrictions according to them. No, they need to nudge our behaviour and our thinking and our language in a sort of rather communist, Stalinist type way. They're not restrictions on our freedoms, and let's remember we are a freedom-loving, democratic, open, liberty-loving nation. No. These are protections. Yes, protections. Really? I think many of us feel we can protect ourselves. We don't need sage scientist protections. Thank you very much. Call me to let me know whether you feel you need protecting, or do you want your freedoms to be given back and to ease up these restrictions. Particularly call me if you're in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland and you are fuming at the restrictions on your freedoms. And it seems to me that the independent sage, which is basically sage on steroids, they're even more draconian in terms of their requests for more lockdowns. They're consistently wrong on requiring tougher measures. They would never have released us back in the summer. And it's interesting, isn't it, that some of these people, for example, on another TV channel just yesterday, there was someone who was introduced as a doctor from a company that you may have never heard of called Every Doctor Limited. And she was promoting these protections as opposed to restrictions and thinking that we needed to have more and more. But what did I say earlier about follow the money? Yes, guess what? She sells masks for a profit. So it's not surprising she wants to promote more protections. There's more good news that I think we need to focus on. And that is that the death rate, the age standardised mortality rate in 2021 in England will be almost bang on the average for the last 10 years. You don't hear that from the Prime Minister, the Health Secretary or anybody else in government, do you? The deaths for 2021 will be less than the 20-year average, will be less than every single year between 2001 and 2009. Do you remember any lockdowns or restrictions in that period? I don't. We have to learn to live with COVID. And I think, actually, we've been doing that pretty well in recent months. And we do that with the leadership, the confidence that we get from, not only the vaccines reducing hospitalisations and deaths, but we know the vaccines is not the end game because we're 131 million jabs later. No. We've got to focus on the antiviral treatments, molnupiravir, Paxlovid, amongst others. I actually want to rename them. Instead of calling it molnupiravir, what about just Molly? Isn't that a bit easier to remember? Instead of Paxlovid, what about Paxi? Instead of Remdesivir, what about Remy? At least we could remember those names in the same way that we remember AstraZeneca and things like that. This is about leadership. And I just fear that we are not receiving that sort of quality leadership, that quality guidance from the government. Do you want do you think there'll be new restrictions in the new year? Is that your fear? Call me 0344 499 1000. Whether it's about the new restrictions, whether it's about some of the jokes and the disasters or that you may or may not have experienced over cooking, Christmas cooking, for example, your best or worst present, whatever. Give us a call, send us a tweet, send us a text. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about these restrictions in Wales and elsewhere with Richard Taylor of Rich Politics. Stay with me. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Investigate what's under the think bonnet.
Talk loud. Talk proud. Highly toxic debate. Battery acid opinions.
A voice above the crowd.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Hi there, welcome back to Tice Talk here on Tuesday afternoon. It's the second bank holiday. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. And keep those calls and tweets coming in. We've already got people from Scotland and from Wales getting in touch. Thank you very much. One here from Wales, Mark Drakeford, was using the word protections last week in his press conference. That's from Jane. Another one from Scotland, from a great name here, Chili Chips and Cause, I think it is. In Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon is playing politics with the excuse of a virus. She's trying to force the hand of the UK government to start furlough again so she can continue to force draconian measures and restrictions upon the country. I hope the UK doesn't cave in. We'll keep those coming in. Fascinating to hear people's thoughts, because it is an extraordinary time, isn't it, where all four countries have got differing levels. The different nations in the UK have got alternative restrictions, but thankfully here in England, we haven't got restrictions. We can still get together. The hospitality sector is thrilled, and maybe you are, whether you're just across the border in Wales or just across the border in Scotland. Are you planning to come and party, whether it's in Bristol or Newcastle? Then let us know. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. But I'm delighted now to be joined by Richard Taylor, who is in Wales. He is the host of Rich Politics, a great political commentator, and has been a consistent critic of Mark Drakeford. Richard, a very good afternoon. I hope you had a great Christmas. So what's the mood in Wales? I can't imagine people are that thrilled with Mr. Drakeford, but perhaps they like these protections.
Well, it's strange, isn't it, Richard? Good to be on the show as well, by the way. And, this time last year, people need to be reminded that Mark Drakeford shut the pubs down. Literally, he told them they could open, but they couldn't sell alcohol, if you remember, and slapped a curfew on at 6 p.m. So pubs were allowed to open last year, but they weren't allowed to sell alcohol.
What sort of pub can't sell alcohol and can't stay open beyond 6 p.m? That doesn't sound like a pub to me. That sounds like a tea house.
Well, it is. That's because he's a teetotaler. But look, the reality is, it's like a butcher opening and not being able to sell meat. It's just absurd. But this time around, of course, different restrictions, completely out of sync with the evidence. The Welsh Government are yet to publish their evidence, Richard, to show the decisions they've made with any proof whatsoever that it's going to be of any good. We had it with vaccine passports here in November. Back in November, the vote went through the Welsh Parliament here where they introduced them. And I quote Mark Drakeford himself, "We're introducing them to stop the spread of the virus and to keep nightclubs open." Those were his words. And then within a month or so, as we're facing now, nightclubs are now shut here in Wales. And, the talk on the ground, Richard, is a lot of people are fed up and frustrated. They just want to get on with their lives, live with this virus, just as they've done with the flu and the colds over centuries. That's what we've come to now. And this Omicron is such an overreaction from both the Scottish government and here in Wales. And people, quite frankly, have had enough. Now, Boxing Day, traditionally, I go and see my family down in Llanelli, my hometown. I went out with my brother for a pint in my old local pub called the Apple Tree. It's normally packed on Boxing Day. There were 6 people in the pub, Richard. It was absolutely shocking. I spoke to the landlord and he told me takings were down by 65%. And there is no financial support from the Welsh Government. They're throwing about 150 million towards the industry, but that is a drop in the ocean when you consider the loss of profits that these companies, these pubs are losing, and the hospitality industry.
And what upsets me so much is that actually, so many people are going to lose their jobs in these pubs, these restaurants, and very, very often, actually, it's younger people who are in the service industry, in the pubs, the restaurants, the clubs, and it's the younger people just out of college, just out of school, just out of university, who are looking for their first or second job, and they're the ones already suffering from these restrictions. They're the ones losing the jobs, losing the income, and in a sense, losing their confidence in their leaders in a nation. I just think it sounds absolutely dire.
Yeah, when Drakeford got a massive, when I say majority, but he got back into power here in Wales, people voted him back in. I think there's a real mood and there's a change in the atmosphere amongst even lifelong Labour supporters here in Wales, and now thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, this is not the kind of government we want to be governed by. And I think people are changing their minds. Another rule that they've brought in here, Richard, which you may be aware of, is that outdoors now to sporting events, only 50 people. And last week in a pub, there were 140 people packed in a pub, and yet only 50 people watching the rugby match or football match, I think it was. I think it was day before yesterday, actually. Correction. They watched the rugby or football indoors, 140 people in a pub, but no more than 50 could watch it outdoors.
So 3 times as many people were in the pub watching the game that only 50 people could watch.
It's crazy.
Outside.
It's crazy. Look, it's laughable. It's laughable, Richard, but it's not the same. It's quite serious because the impact this is having on people's mental health as well, with their socialising part of it. People can't make plans over the new year. Lots of people are talking about going over the Severn Bridge, or Prince of Wales Bridge as it's now known, into Bristol for New Year's celebration. And that's going to have a huge impact on hospitality.
Which makes complete common sense. Why wouldn't you? People are going to... It's the law of unintended consequences. I just find it extraordinary. And you mentioned earlier, and we're going to be talking about it later in the show, about vaccine passports, Richard. So just to help my listeners, you've still got vaccine passports in Wales. You've had them since back in November time. Doesn't sound as though it helped, has it?
But it hasn't worked at all. It doesn't stop the spread of the virus. We all know that, and so does the government themselves. And the idea was to introduce them so people would feel safe when they went out, so we could keep places within the hospitality industry open. And now he shut it. So even his own way of working things out doesn't make any sense whatsoever to the people here in Wales. And even ardent supporters of Mark Drakeford are beginning to question some of his decisions. I've been speaking to a number of staff that work down at the Senedd, and they've been telling me they're scratching their heads down there. They don't know what he's doing. I don't think he knows what he's doing, because there was a stage when they said we're following the science. Now, this is no longer the case here in Wales. Mark Drakeford is using his powers, and it's an overreach of power of government into everybody's daily lives. And to me, it's disproportionate, it's wrong, and it should not be happening. He shouldn't have these powers.
So this is the key question, isn't it? As you go into the new year, actually, what's going to happen? What evidence is he going to dream up, summon up, in order to maintain restrictions? Or do you think that actually the public pressure, or pressure from other leaders and politicians in the Welsh Assembly will actually force him to lift the restrictions? What are your hopes there?
Well, I'm hopeful, at least the Welsh Conservatives here, slightly different to the Conservative UK government, have really gone against vaccine passports from day one. So the implementation of them was through a botched up vote anyway by Welsh Conservative, funny enough, but they are against it. So we do have some opposition here, Richard, against vaccine passports, which I welcome. The only concern I have is that Welsh Labour are now in collaboration with Plaid Cymru, and it's a coalition. They call it a cooperation. It's not. It's a coalition of Plaid Cymru and Welsh Labour. And so unfortunately, they'll always have a majority when it comes to legislating for things such as vaccine passports and any other emergency measures they wish to put into place. So I'm not hopeful for any changes there, but we're not alone. There are many of us on the ground here, not just through protests, but there are a lot of industries, the hospitality industry, which we've already mentioned as well, sporting events. We had the CEO of Cardiff City Football Club complaining that this is terrible because on Boxing Day, their games were cancelled. It weren't cancelled, it was indoors only, so behind closed doors. So fans couldn't turn up to watch the game.
I mean, that's the extraordinary thing, because elsewhere in England, fans can go and watch games. They could be watching Welsh teams playing in England. I mean, the whole thing's a complete nonsense. But the loss, the economic hit to those clubs must be absolutely huge. But it sounds to me, Richard, that you're not actually that hopeful that restrictions are going to be eased in the early weeks of the new year. And if that's the case, I would have thought that resentment in Wales of the freedoms that hopefully we're still continuing to enjoy in England could really grow. I mean, I think that's, I'm a fan of devolution, but I think that's incredibly damaging.
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm not a fan of devolution, Richard. You know that. But we agree to disagree. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I'm able to say Boris has done the right thing. It's very rare that you hear me say that, but on this occasion, I can say it, right? Because, look, what we're seeing happening here is more draconian measures by Mark Drakeford. And I do fear they will continue, because he's been doing this without evidence, without the data to back it up. So what's to stop him continuing, Richard? He seems hooked on the idea of locking people down, taking away civil and social liberties. And let's not forget that prior to some of these restrictions, Mark Drakeford wanted a full lockdown. He was asking the UK Treasury for money. He was asking Rishi Sunak for more furlough money. And as soon as it was said to him, look, it's not available, he then tweaked his little restrictions to minor issues that we're facing, like 6 at a table and 30 indoors and all the kind of stuff they're talking about now. So Drakeford, really, for some reason, I don't know what's in this guy's mind. I can't get my head around it. What political advantage is there? Well, there's no financial advantage. I don't understand why he's doing it. And so sure a lot of people feel the same.
Well, maybe it's actually two issues, Richard. Maybe it's that sort of, power goes to people's heads. So maybe it is that sort of control over people's lives. But also, and I think this is what's going on in Scotland as well, actually, I think the money does talk. And I think they will be using this as a negotiating lever to get more money out of Westminster. And again, I think this is really divisive, where if that happens, whether it's money going from Westminster to Scotland or Westminster to Wales, you've then got a situation where actually you're going to have people in England resenting more money going to Wales, more money going to Scotland. And again, that actually is very divisive at a time when, as a nation, we actually need to be pulling together as the United Kingdom. We need to be pulling together. We need to be looking forward to the new year. And we need to be putting the foot flat on the accelerator of recovery, of growth, of motivation, of confidence. And none of that seems to be coming.
No. Well, I was, at the start of this pandemic, I was calling for a four-nation approach. I mean, it was so confusing, as we've seen the last 2 years, Richard, with different rules here in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England. And what should have happened, and I know it hasn't happened for political reasons, which is a real shame, because they say it's a public health emergency, but if it was that serious, then surely they could get their heads on the table. And Mark Drakeford has used it here as a political football, really, against Boris Johnson, the Conservative government, to try and score political points. And I think that's a crying shame, because they could have worked together, made the rules much simpler, much easier for everyone to understand. Although I don't agree with restrictions or lockdowns, I don't believe they've worked. It's my personal opinion, of course.
Sure.
And I think it's had a devastating impact. And the long-term impact of this, Richard, when a public inquiry is held, is going to show the state of people's mental health, the loss of businesses, the loss of life as well. We've report this morning from one of the Welsh media outlets here stated that a young person died because they didn't get diagnosed with a brain tumour early enough, and the operation was cancelled. And it's just terrible.
There are so many implications of these continuing restrictions, which are so divisive, so damaging. Richard Taylor, thank you so much for those thoughts about what's going on in Wales. The mood sounds pretty grim to me. Stay with us. We're having a quick break. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
On Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's just after 1:30 and the tweets are pouring in from all over the United Kingdom. Some great ones I'll just read out here. Wales, the maths are bonkers. You can have 10 tables of 6 but not 6 tables of 10. Why not 15 tables of 4? I think this comes from a maths teacher. It's complete madness from Neil in Swansea. We've got one here. I'm not quite sure where it is, but it's obviously not from England. Richard, it's terrible over here. No one's questioning these absurd restrictions. They're putting one-way systems in shops, limiting the number. It's the elderly I feel sorry for. And then there's one also from Northern Ireland. The restrictions being imposed in Northern Ireland are a joke. Have our executive gone insane, doing exact thing as over the past 18 months and expecting different results? There's no question that people feel these restrictions are unjustified, and all over the United Kingdom, at a time when we should be looking forward to the new year, I think people's anger is growing. We're going to go to some calls. Felicity is in, I think, Belfast. Felicity, good afternoon. What's the mood in Belfast?
Oh, well, mutinous amongst some of us, but very acquiescent among many others. Our media does not comment or challenge anything, as has been the case throughout much of the UK, and that's one of our problems. One of the really frightening changes that we've now got in Northern Ireland starting yesterday is that you're probably all aware, those of you using masks to go into some places, if you're exempt, you can actually say to the people at the door or whatever, I'm exempt, and that's it. People don't challenge you. In Northern Ireland from yesterday, if you are medically exempt, you must prove that to anybody who asks you why you're not wearing a mask. So you have to produce evidence.
So you have to produce evidence, because my understanding, and perhaps it's different in Northern Ireland, but I understood that they weren't allowed to ask you for evidence.
Yeah. Until yesterday, it was announced last week merely as an adjunct to various other things. And the other thing is that if you have psychological stress, for example, having been a rape victim, and you cannot wear a mask, it's not a medical condition about breathing, but a psychological condition, they have abolished that exemption. So if wearing a mask gives you psychological stress and would mean you couldn't do it, you basically can't go shopping, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to a bar. That's what's been done to us, on top of other army stuff. But this one is particularly cruel, I think.
And I mean, I just, it does feel cruel. And, it seems to me, I mean, issues in Northern Ireland, you've got so many other issues to do with the protocol, challenges of getting supplies of goods from the rest of the UK anyway. Mm-hmm. But to be looking across at England, where we haven't got these restrictions, must be sort of doubly infuriating.
Well, absolutely. I mean, my husband and I recently visiting London, and I mean, it was just as all the hysteria was ramping up, but we still were struck by the fact that, for example, we can go into a bar or a restaurant in London and nobody was asking us to prove our vaccine status. We have that here as well in Northern Ireland. And of course, the mask thing, it was merely if one was exempt. Nothing was said to you. And if if somebody had said it, you merely said, I'm exempt, and that's it. No, now in Northern Ireland, vaccine status. And if you have a problem, you're going to have to show the man on the door what it is medically that means you can't wear a mask. It's not exactly a nice environment for people to live in.
It doesn't sound it, Felicity. It really doesn't. And how hopeful are you that if the data continues in the current direction across the whole of the UK in terms of reduction in number of cases and ICU hospitalisations, that actually these restrictions in Northern Ireland might be lifted straight after the new year?
Well, I would be delighted if they were. I'm not hopeful. We have an odd government structure here. We have this compulsory coalition where the largest party, which is here the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party,
yes,
they are opposed to most of these restrictions, right? But because of the way our system works, the other parties are forcing it through. Our health minister is a member of the Unionist Party. It's one of the smallest parties in government, but he has this sort of power, and the other smaller parties are supporting him. We have a chief medical officer, every bit as worshipped as your chief medical officer, and what Mr. McBride says just goes, and I really worry that the numbers will just be ignored and we will just continue off. The only blessing we have is, like your Welsh commentator earlier, there's not the money for furlough, so they can't actually lock us down, but it's death by 1,000 cuts for a lot of small businesses.
It sounds to me as though you've got a double combination of the smaller parties in the coalition playing party politics, and in a sense, everybody looking for more money from Westminster. Felicity, thank you very much for those thoughts from Belfast. We're going to go from Belfast up to Norwich, where we've got Jamie for some thoughts from East Anglia. Jamie, good afternoon. What's going on in Norwich?
Oh, it's all very good in Norwich at the moment. You know, pubs are open, people are going, but people are sort of, the pub trade is definitely down. I mean, you walk in a bar, there's nobody there. So it's almost like self-censorship. One thing I will there's a couple of things I need to point out. One is this vaccine passport, or this proof of vaccine, you know, this little thing you carry around on your app. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
If you go into a sporting event, sadly, the local football club has to, and through the government has to do that. It's very sad because if you have these COVID passports, whatever they call them on the NHS app, mine's valid till, let's say, the 20th of January. But I had my booster back in end of November. So in that time, can I not catch COVID or be transmissible of COVID? Does that make sense?
It doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, you know, I've never been in favour of vaccine passports. They've been tried elsewhere in the world. It's quite clear from the real-world evidence they make no difference whatsoever. You know, Wales has had them, Scotland's had them. Hasn't exactly helped them, has it?
No, it hasn't. And the other point I'd like to raise is the people that are not getting treated. My personal story is I got prostate cancer actually in May 2019. And the only reason I was diagnosed with that is because I went for a well-man check. Yeah, there was nothing wrong with me, but I went for a well-man check and a PSA check. Went in there, discovered it. It's been treated. I'm absolutely fine. But
that's good to hear.
That's great. Yeah, it is good to hear. Yeah. And subsequently, they had the lockdown. Okay, so people of my age, I'm sort of in my 50s, they're probably getting a few aches and pains, and they're probably getting a little bit, you know, I'll go to it, but we're a bit busy at the moment. I don't want to bother the doctors and what's happening is diagnoses are being missed because people aren't getting checked.
Oh, that without question, that is, I think, one of the greatest, possibly the greatest collateral damage, alongside the damage to education of our children. But
more people,
so many people are missing. That's right, and the excess deaths at home above the 5-year average. I think a number is 81,000 people higher than the 5-year average have died at home since the beginning of the COVID crisis.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think this situation is getting worse, and what really concerns me, Jamie, is that in the rush to make the booster programme happen faster, actually GPs have been offered additional money during the week and even more additional money at the weekend in order to get boosters, when actually I would have thought that it should be pharmacists, it should be the volunteers, other people trained to give jabs who should be doing the boosting, so that GPs are freed up to look after non-COVID patients. I mean, for example, when I was jabbed, my first jab came from a lady who was a stage manager in a theatre who'd been essentially furloughed for many months. So it just feels to me that it's completely the wrong way around.
For argument's sake, I get checked every 6 months now, and I have my PSA checked, and it's all been very, very good. My last appointment was put back by 3 months. I insisted, look, I'm being checked every 6 months, but they put the appointment back to be checked. So that stretches that to 9 months. In that period, I could have had an increase in my PSA. Do you see what I mean?
Completely. And the idea that we should be boosting people in their 20s using GPs who were therefore indeed encouraged, certainly by NHS England, essentially to defer the regular checks of some of the more elderly folk in order to boost people in their 20s, just utterly defies common sense. But maybe I'm missing something, Jamie.
Well, if I'm on the air and people listen to me, if you're a gentleman or a lady and you've got an ache or a pain, go and see your GP. Don't put it off. That's all I'll say. If anything could say that to make someone get up off their sofa today, make a call and say, I'll get that done, then my job is done.
Fantastic. Jamie, that is great advice, and it's good to hear that you're in the clear from your prostate cancer, and I trust that remains the case for a very long time indeed. Certainly, I'm 57. That's on my mind. You need to have regular checkups, and I advise, as Jamie did, Everybody should get regular checkups. Don't take no or deferral for an answer. Meanwhile, thank you for that, Jamie from Norwich. Meanwhile, Pete C, I assume from Northern Ireland, he calls me Dickie Boy. Thank you for that, Pete. Arlene Foster would not have shut everything down. Again, that's an interesting point. And I suspect you're probably right there, Pete. It requires leadership and courage, and we're just not seeing that in 3 of the 4 nations in the UK. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the huge energy price increase with Andrew Long. But for now, you're listening to Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Talk Radio.
Smooth, strong, and
and very long.
Tell your ears to chew on this.
We think what you say.
Thoughtfully you're thinking.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. Well, we've had some great calls talking about the restrictions, some great messages from all over the United Kingdom. And you're just looking at the board here. People are really furious about these restrictions, about what is going on. But there's something else massive going on that I think is going to be the big hot topic in 2022. And I want you to give me a call, 0344 499 1000, if you're one of the millions who've already had your energy company go bust on you, so that your fixed priced energy deal, whether it's electricity or gas, has essentially now moved back to the standard variable rate. Give us a call to talk about that, because it looks like in April that the average cost in terms of the cap will increase by about 50%. That's an additional £700 additional cost. But of course, that £700, to earn that, you've actually got to earn about £1,000 before tax in order to be able to afford the £700 of additional energy costs that so many people, millions and millions of people, are going to be facing. And we had the business sector yesterday, bank holiday Monday. You know things are bad when even Kwasi Kwarteng himself, the business secretary, actually has a meeting with senior executives from the energy industry. They met, but the truth is they didn't really conclude anything. They potentially concocted some idea that the additional cost, they might sort of borrow from the government and repay it over 10 years. Do they seriously think that this price increase, this in the global gas markets, the wholesale markets, do they really think this is temporary? I mean, we're not even into the cold part of winter yet. We've had a mild winter so far, and yet we've had the wholesale gas markets internationally have increased in the last 6 months 5 times. And you know what? You just know what will happen. We'll have a really cold January and February. So let's go now to Andrew Long, who is the Chief Executive of Switchcraft and Energy Export, to talk about the implications of this, the reasons why. Andrew, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. So, you know, these increases, they are absolutely huge. I think many millions of people are going to really struggle to afford this additional £1,000 before tax to pay the £700 net of tax, give or take. What's your sense about how customers are feeling and responding? Obviously, you're very close to the retail market.
Well, first thing to say is that the increase could be even bigger than that. So I've seen plenty of commentators in the industry talk about doubling of prices or even tripling of prices. It really depends on how long wholesale prices stay high for. And I think we've moved away from the understanding that it was going to be a short, sharp shock. And now the picture looks like it's going to be something that persists for a long time. So it could be even larger than that. In terms of the impact and the way people are feeling it, we haven't really felt that yet because the price cap is artificially low at the moment. People are not feeling it in their bills yet because most people are now at the price cap. It's only from end of March, beginning of April, that the huge price increases are going to come through. And then people's finances, all of our finances, are going to be very, very badly affected.
Just at the same time, when, of course, the national insurance tax increases are coming in. I mean, you couldn't make it up. But I just think that the government and Kwasi Kwarteng have been incredibly naive and complacent about this. I remember him back in September saying, oh, the increase in prices was only temporary and it was sort of nothing to worry about.
Indeed, they were expecting a spike and for everything to settle down. And you can say, look, some of these small suppliers that have gone bust, you can say they're badly run. But when half the sector goes bust, which, you know, something like 25 out of 50 suppliers that existed a few months ago have gone bust, then it becomes very difficult to say, well, all of them must have been badly run. And then you have to start looking at the regulatory context and the setup, the framework that they're operating within and consider changes to that environment and what we need to do there.
Exactly, because I think they're actually guilty of comparing apples with pears because, yes, there are huge problems in terms of the undercapitalised retail energy market, and you know, frankly, you and I with about 50 or 100 grand could set up our own energy business and start trading it and retailing it. But the truth is, the issue is not, in my view, at the front end, the retail end. The issue is in the price of the wholesale end. That of course, is essentially being set by Putin himself, who's restricting supply, knowing that will increase prices, knowing that continental Europe relies on Russian gas for about 50% of their energy needs. He's playing a very big, clever geopolitical game, and I think our government's been caught completely wrong-footed.
Absolutely, there have been, but I think before we get too tough on them, let's also understand that it's a Europe-wide problem. So this increase in wholesale markets and feeding through to the retail market, we see across Europe. So absolutely, we need to think deeply about energy security, and we need to think urgently about that, and that's something that will play out over the next 10 years or so. But we also need to think more short-term. First of all, how do we manage the impact on household bills, on all of us, on our personal finances in the near term? And then also, how do we do that in an even-handed way so that the small challenger suppliers are not squeezed out of the market any more than they have been already? Because not only do many customers like myself enjoy having my energy supplied by a smaller firm, but it's also so important to preserve competition in the sector. That's what the last 2 decades of regulation have been about, encouraging competition and trusting the competitive market to drive better outcomes, better service, better pricing for all of us. And it's so important that we don't lose sight of that, because otherwise we'll be back to the days of the big six, and they'll fleece us.
Indeed, that's absolutely right. I mean, I've just got a tweet in here, Andrew, from London All Trader saying that no way the price cap will be 50%. It'll rise again in October of next year. I really do feel this will run and run. But I feel that Putin will continue to restrict supply, and that will keep prices high.
That seems very, very plausible. I mean, he's done a fantastic job of defending his own interests, and probably what he's doing probably goes down quite well domestically in terms of Russian politics. But no, it's clearly a big deal for all of us. I would normally favour, leaving things alone, letting the competitive market do its thing. But it's got to the point now where the government needs to step in and provide support, as you said, in the wholesale market, and then preserve the competitive market for the future. And safeguard our household finances.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for those thoughts. My view actually is that essentially utilities, in this case energy, is part of our critical national infrastructure, and we need to be much more self-reliant. I'm going to be coming back and talking about shale gas and fracking, because that's the big opportunity to be much more self-reliant, much cheaper energy bills going forwards. You're listening to Tice Talk. Stay with us. It is here, of course, the home of common sense, the home of truth. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We're into the second hour. If you were listening at the beginning, I think we may have had a marginal sound hiccup. We're trying to work out who pressed the wrong button, whether I was guilty or anybody else. But anyway, we've sorted that out. We've got lots of tweets coming in about the energy price crisis and people's thoughts on that. There's a point here which is the retail energy market in the UK is effectively a Ponzi scheme. That is one. Another one interesting here from Glenn. Our utility providers should be taken back into public ownership. That's gas, electricity and water. I've talked about that before, actually, and I'll be talking about it a lot next year, because there's no question that the ownership of all our public utilities is wrong, and particularly overseas-owned investors are making absolute fortunes. They are racketeering from our public utilities at the expense of British consumers. Glenn is on to something there. We've got one more here, which is that, where is it? Here we go. Because the energy crisis is 100% of the government's own making, perhaps we'll see fuel allowances dramatically increased because the £200 fuel allowance is no longer fit for purpose. Well, based on these price increases, it clearly isn't. Well, we've gone from the very serious to the absurd now with my next guest, because we have to look at the judge's 540-page guidance. Yes, you heard it right. 540 pages of guidance about equal treatment in the bench book provided by the Judicial College. I mean, I didn't actually know there was a Judicial College. I'm sure that's a good thing. But if they really need to produce a guidance book about equal treatment and how to speak, which pronouns to use or not use, and it takes 540 pages, I'm wondering about the spending of taxpayers' cash. And it seems that judges are being told essentially how they can speak, how they can refer to people. And I want to talk about this more with Andrew Allison, Chief Executive of the Freedom of Association. Andrew, a very good afternoon to you. It doesn't sound to me as though the judges are very free in how they might address people. It seems, for example, we hear that postmen and women are no longer allowed to be called that. They have to be called postal operatives. What's going on here?
Postal operative Pat. It doesn't flow off the tongue, really, does it? I think the good news, though, about most of our judges, though, Richard, is that they do tend to be independent. And I imagine many of them will have had a little look at this guidance and have thrown it in the bin. But I've said before that the civil service, the whole civil service in this country, is just full of wokery, political correctness, or lunacy, whatever you want to call it. But it's happening all over the place. And, of course, there's a story also today in the Daily Mail about similar things happening in Wales with an A to Z list of what civil servants cannot say. For example, you can't say able-bodied anymore. You must say non-disabled. Total lunacy, but it's going on all over the place.
And what worries me is, I mean, the amount of time, effort and resource that civil servants must be spending on this nonsense, when actually I think what consumers and voters, the public up and down the whole of the United Kingdom want our civil servants to focus on getting faster, more efficient public services with better outcomes. But just focusing on this 540-page guidebook for judges, I think the most serious thing was the suggestion that criminal defendants in cases can self-identify as to how they want to be addressed by the judge and by everybody in the courtroom, by what gender and what pronoun they should be used. I mean, seriously? If you're looking at for example, a case involving a rape or a sexual offence, you've got, victims who suffer real anxiety, real concern, and suddenly they might have to listen to the alleged perpetrator of some form of sexual violence, domestic abuse or rape being referred to as a woman. I mean, I just think this is horrendous.
Yeah, it is horrendous. And we saw a similar case in Scotland, wasn't it? I think a few days ago, where there was someone who identified as a woman was guilty of having sex with an animal, a very strange, perverted story. But it was obviously not a woman. It was a man. And you could clearly see that it was a man. And you're right. I mean, if someone who identifies as a woman then goes on to rape another woman, I'm afraid it was a man who was raping a woman. And of course, this skews the whole statistics, doesn't it, Richard? Because it makes it look as if more women are guilty of rape. Well, it isn't more women that are guilty of rape. It's people who are identifying as women and they're really men. So no, this should not be allowed to go ahead at all.
I mean, there is just zero common sense in that suggestion, and I actually think that it's dangerous to the anxiety and the sensibilities and the feelings of women who may have been the victim of such domestic abuse or a rape allegation, and it's actually offensive to all women. Women have battled for so long to get equality, and now all of a sudden they're not allowed that equality in order to suit a very small minority of people, who want to sort of what I call the trans zealots. I should probably be cancelled for calling them that, but frankly, I don't care. Who want to change the whole language, the way we speak, the way we think, how we operate, and now it seems they want to change the way that our courts proceed.
Yes, this is exactly the point. I mean, we're talking about maybe 1%, if that, of people who may possibly be offended by some of the things that we've been discussing. But it's as if we all have to change the language that we use, language that is well established in our country, just to try and please a small minority. You call them trans zealots, I call them trans fascists, but I think both phrases work rather well. These people are just trying to change the way we think, to change the way that we communicate, just because of their cause. But we hear about it every week now, Richard. Oh, well, just about every day, really. Another story coming through. And I think what we actually want is our politicians to start taking charge. Now, when there was a similar ludicrous guide issued by the Ministry of Defence for armed service personnel, the Defence Secretary had a look at this and said, no, I'm withdrawing it. Now, I think we need a lot more of that from our politicians and from ministers. So let's see where the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, is in all of this, and let's hear what he has to say about this.
Completely. This, again, feels like another huge growing battleground. I thought we were sort of making some progress in 2021 on the whole sort of the culture wars, the anti-wokery, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being naive on this. Maybe we're just at the foothills of where this goes. And you're right, actually. It requires leadership and strength. You use the example of the Defence Secretary, but bluntly, every Secretary of State in every single government department should be making it crystal clear to all of the civil servants in their departments that we're not interested in this stuff. We're not going to tolerate it, and we're certainly not going to pay their salaries in order to promote it. And I've got real concerns also about this charity called Stonewall that seems to be quite well remunerated by certain government departments in order to sort of propagate this nonsense.
Stonewall was a charity that was campaigning for gay and lesbian rights. It effectively won all the campaigns that it prosecuted. It's been a very successful charity, and instead of just folding up and saying, "Well, that's great, job done," it's now got into the trans debate. But it's also feeling the heat because many government departments are now withdrawing support from Stonewall, and that support is literally tens of thousands of pounds a year. So perhaps we are moving in the right direction there to give us some hope for 2022. We've also had the case last week in the High Court where non-crime hate incidents will no longer be recorded, so the police can't sort of put something on your criminal record for something you've said when it isn't a crime. So that is moving in the right direction. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but by God, it's slow, isn't it?
Oh, it's hard work. And I mean, that particular case with Harry Miller that you referred to just before Christmas, he fought for many, many months. And that involved huge sums of money, which obviously most people, can't access. But it was a really critical principle, and he won that against the policing college. But it goes on and on. You'll enjoy this as in your title as chief exec of the Freedom Association, Andrew. You'll enjoy a tweet that came in earlier from Chris in Watford, who shouts out, "I want my freedom back. No more restrictions." Well, I think we want our freedoms back, don't we, Andrew, in terms of the way that we can speak, the way that we can think. the way that we can just interact with our friends, whether it's in our homes or whether it's watching kids on the touchline or whether it's, in a pub or a restaurant, surely.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there was a report, I think earlier this year, that said most people now feel that they can't say what they think, what they should be able to say, and certainly are less freer than they were 5 years ago. And that is without a doubt, because we hear these stories all the time. And of course, we all want to be freer. We want to get rid of these restrictions. Good that these COVID restrictions, if I just mentioned that, and not in England as yet. But thank goodness for the 100 Conservative backbench rebels. Thank goodness for Lord Frost for resigning when he did, and thank goodness for the cabinet taking a stand against the Prime Minister. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that we would have had more of those restrictions. So, as we move into 2022, Richard, there is still a hell of a lot to fight for, be it for free speech, be it against restrictions for COVID. Lots and lots of things to fight for, because we're certainly not a free society at the moment.
We're really not, and particularly if you're in Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. But it's the restrictions on COVID, but just the restrictions on the way that we can speak and think, and just interact with our friends, colleagues, at work or wherever. It's absolutely critical to a free libertarian society. Andrew, thank you so much for those thoughts. It really is just one of the other big battlegrounds going forward. But give us a ring, 0344 499 1000, if you've come across some wokery that's driven you mad, wherever you may be across the UK or indeed across the world. If you're listening internationally, and maybe you've got less wokery, or maybe you've got more, and actually it's not too bad, let us know either by tweet, by text, or by giving us a call. Coming up, we'll be going to your calls, and then we'll be talking to Stephen Wolfe later in the hour about the migrant crisis coming across the channel, concerns for next year, and also the abuse of some of the channel migrants pretending that they're children in order to get more benefits. All of this, stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Best recipe ever.
Pan-national agitated debate and discussion.
Radio with an answer for everything.
Powered by your opinions. Something to talk about. Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. And after my show at 4, we've got Christo with his Drive Time show. And then at 7, we've got Claudia Liza from 7 till 10. Now, Matt here, he tweets in, has April Fool's Day been brought forward 4 months? Or is it time for a revolution against this woke madness? How much money, how much taxpayers' cash, Matt asks, was spaffed up against the wall for this? And that's my concern. It's a combination of the money, the resources, the time, the effort in all of this stuff, which could be so much more constructively used in actually working and improving public services for all of us. Surely that's what we want. We're going to go all the way up to Aberdeenshire to speak to Rico to find out what's going on in Scotland and how's the mood in Scotland. Rico, what's the feeling?
Whinging, whining Tories have said, the government should intervene, when they're the same idiots who campaigned for the free market to allow unhindered and uncontrolled private companies to rule our electric and gas companies. The price rises are your own fault for wanting the free market, which doesn't work. It should be regulated, and the means and methods of production should be owned by the people, for the people.
And you may have been listening earlier, Rico. There was a message in, actually, a tweet in from Glenn referring to public ownership. And,
yes.
I've talked about it before, but I have real concerns about all of our critical national infrastructure. It's not just gas or electricity, but all of it. Essentially,
railways, for example, take more money since it privatised as it ever did when it was owned by us.
Yeah, and
shareholders.
These utilities, I think there's a best of both worlds scenario, Rico, where, because what's happening is many of our public utilities are owned by overseas investors. In fact,
it's owned by the French and Americans. Thatcher sold them.
Well, it's not just Americans. Actually, the biggest single owner of all our utilities, Rico, is actually a Chinese billionaire, and he's making 20%.
Really?
Yeah,
well,
you hear it here first. You get the facts on Talk Radio, Rico, because he's making 20% a year. I've done the research, done the analysis on his money, and that's basically for what is effectively a monopoly. And I think we need a blend of part public ownership, part owned by British pension funds on behalf of British pensioners, with private sector management. So you try and get the best of both worlds.
Infrastructure, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we've got to have a proper discussion about this. And I think actually, this energy crisis that's coming down the pipe, facing us all next year, I'm going to be involved, trust me, Rico, in this discussion, because I think we need to bring it to the fore, because it's not right.
Absolutely. It's going to be disastrous.
We're just losing you. Are you speaking into the phone enough there, Rico?
Sorry, it's a disaster in the making, because basically the short-sighted Thatcherism was free market, and now it's come back and bit them all in the bum very hard.
Well, I mean, I believe in markets, but they've got to be smartly regulated and sensibly organised.
Absolutely.
So you get the best of both worlds. Now, interestingly, for example, Rico, in America or in France, overseas investors are not allowed to own critical national infrastructure, but here, under both Labour and the Tories, actually, essentially the privatisation, the wholesale privatisation, without any form of controls of our public utilities, I'm afraid it's really come back to bite us where it hurts.
New Labour, Tony Blair was the best Tory Prime Minister we ever had.
Well, there we are. Some will agree, some will disagree. Rico, thank you very much. So, but just before you go, Rico, tell us, what are you going to be doing on New Year's Eve? Because
sitting in the house and feeling sorry for myself, since blooming traitor Sturgeon, who stabbed Alex Salmond in the back, has now stabbed the whole country in the back by cancelling Hogmanay for a disease which, according to
and that's been their experience. They've had a few sniffles, at best a mild flu. I'm sure you've probably got friends the same. Rico, thank you so much for those thoughts from Aberdeenshire. He's not very chuffed with Nicola Sturgeon. Equally, he wasn't very chuffed with Margaret Thatcher. He didn't actually say who he was chuffed with. But we're going to go over to Lancashire and speak to Simon. Simon, what are your thoughts? Who are you chuffed with amongst our leaders of our four nations?
Well, you put me on the spot there. I wasn't going to talk about that, but I will say I I think you've got to say Boris. But the thing is, I think if Boris hadn't had the Partygate, maybe he might be doing something differently. Sorry, go on.
Is that what you wanted to say?
No, it was. I'm in the energy industry, and even just what you was talking about there to the fellow in Aberdeen. I think the regulation, whether it's nationalised, or I think you should go back a step further than this as to where you're getting your electricity from and your gas from. I mean, just a point on what you mentioned there about, the Chinese own big chunks of the North Sea. And also the infrastructure, you've done your research. And even something that's, you couldn't believe it is, we've got new gas coming along, in the southern sector of the North Sea. Now, this has already been bought by the Russians. Gazprom own this. So they've got to knock down prices, and they're going to sell our own gas from the UK continental shelf to us at vastly increased prices. So things like this that people may not receive this in the mainstream media. It is out there in the media if people want to see it.
So you're saying Gazprom have bought one of the fields, perhaps one of the smaller fields
in the southern sector
of our North Sea.
Yeah, it's our gas. It's UK continental shelf gas. They've bought it and they're going to sell it back to us. Isn't that fantastic?
I just think it's absurd. It's appalling. You've got Shell, which have pulled out, I think, of the Cameo field to the north. It's the north of the Shetlands, isn't it?
Well, we've got an opportunity now that Shell are now based in London. But what I'd like to say first is, there's a lot of movement in the media that say that it's a global problem. The government love this idea. It's a global problem. It's not our fault. Or they say I know you've mentioned it's a European problem. Yes, it is. But really, let's break it down. It's a UK problem. We should take the responsibility for the energy that we use. We've got enough energy we can use. And the problem that's happening at the moment is because of the price shocks. I think what the government are hoping, in a roundabout way, depending on what Russia does, movement-wise in the Ukraine they can just point the finger. As soon as, if Russian boots go on the ground in Ukraine, I reckon they'll pull the energy price cap early, they'll put up prices, they'll point the finger at Putin.
But you've hit the point there, Simon. I agree entirely. We need to be self-reliant. And it's no good blaming Europe. Continental Europe, they're their own worst enemy in this because, for example, Germany got rid of its safe zero-carbon nuclear power stations.
It's getting rid of more nuclear power stations.
That's right.
The end of the year. It's incredible.
France is closing down some of its nuclear power stations, which I can't believe. But the reality is, if you just look across the Atlantic to America, they're extracting shale gas. They are totally self-reliant on American gas, American oil, and guess what? Their energy prices, their gas prices, I understand.
You're preaching to the converted era.
They're about a third of this. This is the opportunity.
Well, I was down there, in Gonzales in Texas last year, and in a local community, their prices are lower again because of the extraction of gas.
There you are.
Now, I'm pro. I live near the Quadrilla site in Lancashire. I'm pro-shale gas because I know what it can do to the community. And as you say, it will insulate us from gas prices, not only in Europe, but the world. So it's a way of, as you've mentioned there, the Henry Hub market that's available in the States. That's why we've got about 12, 14 fracked US LNG tankers sailing across the Atlantic to bail us out right as we speak. So
it's unbelievable. It's only 4 years ago, Simon, isn't it, that in the Tory manifesto, you had a commitment to shale gas industry, to creating hundreds or thousands and thousands of jobs. You had people like the current business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, proudly saying that it was part of our future. You had the former health secretary, Matt Hancock, when he was an energy minister, promoting it. The first sign of a couple of eco-bullies and eco-zealots, and they run for the hills.
Well, that's it. Moving on to that, it was. I've been told, it was Boris on the nail that he was the man that put the moratorium in place because he was worried he was going to lose. He was bullied by the Greens, effectively, that he was going to lose MPs in the north of England. He possibly could have lost one or two. And so, from your initial question, who do I revere now? I suppose for the no lockdowns. I'm villainising him now for actually creating this huge problem, and a lot of this is by the intermittent renewables as well. billions and billions of pounds in subsidies that these are sucking up. And as you mentioned before, they're all owned by foreign companies.
Exactly.
The steel jackets are made in China. They're sailed over, or the UAE. They're sailed in. Scotland just about provides the seabed. That's where we're at. And as for people like Prince Charles who promote green energy, well, from the Crown Estates, him and his family are receiving hundreds of millions of pounds every year from renting out the seabed to these foreign companies. So of course that's going to pay for his private helicopter.
And Simon, the solar panels, guess where most of those are made? They're also made in China. Simon,
of course.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for those thoughts. I've got real concerns. We could so easily be energy self-sufficient here in the UK, but under this government, this failed leadership, they've done the opposite. They've exposed us. It's strategically wrong, and we need to change it. You're listening to Tice Talk. Stay with us. It's Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
on Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Keep those calls coming in 0344 499 1000 and the tweets at Talk Radio. Frank in Bromley has messaged us saying, Richard, tell Rico the UK energy market isn't privatised because the government won't allow fracking. Frank, I know what you're trying to say, which is that it's not a completely open market, but the reality is the energy market is completely privatised. Much of it, huge chunk of it, is overseas owned. There's massive profiteering, massive racketeering going on at the expense of the British consumer. I'm going to be talking about that a lot in 2022. But we're going to move on now to another story in the papers. We've all been aware of the huge increase in illegal migration across the Channel in 2021, almost 30,000 people. Who knows what it'll be next year? And we learn now that actually over 1,000 of those have pretended completely wrongly that they are children in order to get higher benefits, higher rewards as they're arriving here in the UK, essentially abusing our hospitality, that of course is the hospitality and the cost of all of us taxpayers. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Wolfe, who's the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, to discuss this and what's likely to happen next year. Stephen, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've had a fine Christmas. But
good afternoon, Richard.
In a sense, a pretty shocking story, this, about 2/3 of all of the children applicants turned out to be false. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised. Our research has shown that the system that the government uses to assess children is really incapable of assessing children in the first place, is massively impacted by those non-governmental organizations and charities that use the excuse of unaccompanied children as a weapon against the Home Office and Priti Patel in particular. And a Court of Appeal decision that had a dramatic impact on the assessment of Home Office officials for those that they assessed were over the age of 25. So the system is definitely not fit for purpose.
And is that mainly the fault of Home Office civil servants who, in a sense, are not using existing laws? Or is this only going to change with the new Nationality and Borders Bill, which in theory will be passed next year?
Well, firstly, the main reason is that civil servants who are constantly under pressure from what I call the immigration industry that are supporting mass open door migration and asylum, which doesn't distinguish very clearly between those who are genuine asylum seekers and those who are here as economic migrants. They then push governments who then use the civil service as a kind of protective weapon against them in respect to children. No one wants to touch this as an area. And the next one is the rules. The rules on assessment are pretty clear. They talk about whether a child is over 25 as the cutoff point, where you kind of look at them for whether they've got facial hair, the depth of their voice, their characteristics. Well, here's the rub. The benefit of the doubt is given to them if they don't have documentation for them being children, despite what we might normally regard as someone looking over an adult. And secondly, a lot of the reasons are made by people assessing them in local authorities, not the Home Office. So again, this is a system that's open for abuse and open for failure from the start.
And essentially, therefore, you can imagine that people, the gangmasters, people are essentially encouraging these illegal migrants to make this claim, because actually about 1,100, that represents almost 5%, because these figures were to the end of September. That's about 5% of those who arrived here across the Channel in the previous 12 months. As we look forward, Stephen, to next year, talk to me and my listeners about this Borders Bill, which is sort of chugging slowly through Parliament, that the Home Secretary and all of the Tory MPs are sort of they really are pinning their hopes on. They seem to think that it's the magic tree, the magic wand that is going to completely end and finish this crisis. What are your thoughts on it? When's it likely to come into to place?
Well, I think we've got some time before it comes into place, and I don't expect it before the middle to the end of next year, because by the time it goes through the second readings and the third readings and those readings in the House of Lords, there will be a lot of those on the pro-mass migration teams that are trying to weaken the bill with amendments, and I can see huge numbers of that going through the House of Lords. So don't expect anything immediate. Secondly, it is not the quick fix that many of the Conservative MPs want. It will do some elements. It divides those channel migrants coming over into two groups. So if you're one of the groups that turns up, goes straight to the border agencies and holds their hands up and makes an asylum application, then yes, you'll be in the process. If you try and avoid it and run off into the distance and then are caught later, then your asylum application is distinctly damaged. And also what they're pinning their hopes on is the fact that they can try and assess people as coming through safe countries, and the argument whether France, Germany are unsafe to those migrants. So that's going to make an impact. But why it will fail, Richard, is the same old problem. Firstly, we have a very enticing system for people coming from foreign countries to us: benefits, housing, food, jobs, education, health, which are the main primary reasons these people are saying that they want to come to the UK. And secondly, we do not have an effective assessment situation outside of big cities and a returns policy that works.
But there's nothing
Unless you can return them, it's failure.
But there's nothing I see in that Borders Bill, however long it takes to come to become an act, that will actually stop the boats leaving France. And it's only actually when you essentially terminate the business model, as Australia did all those years ago, that's the only thing that's going to stop this. The idea that sort of changing the way of assessing people is going to reduce the appeal and attractiveness of people coming to the UK and is going to stop the people smugglers from making millions a week, I think is for the birds.
And you're quite right, Richard. It won't make that massive impact. One of the really strongest points that we could have utilised in this bill, and maybe that might come later, is if we'd actually genuinely made an assessment where we took those asylum applicants outside of the UK or into very, and do deals with other countries. We did an assessment with Albania. I know they've rejected it, but Albania would have profited to $500 million, and this country would have saved $500 million at the same time if we'd assessed them there, for example. That won't happen. There isn't the political will to do so. And next year, we're going to face even bigger numbers.
So in a sense, within this bill, there is the ability to create offshore processing centres, but it's meaningless because we haven't got any offshore processing centres. So once again, it's warm words, it's waffle, but there's going to be no delivery, no action behind it. So as you say, the numbers next year, what are your predictions for the total number for 2022, bearing in mind that 2021 will be a whisker under 30,000?
Well, we made an assessment at the beginning of the year that it would be 30,000, and we're very close to that. Our assessment next year that it's going to be 40 to 45, and that's going to be because there will be a massive, seriously massive influx of Afghan asylum applicants already using the very tried and tested people trafficker routes that the Iranians and Iraqis are using now. You remember that up to about 82% of all those coming across on the boats are Iranian and Afghans in the ages of 18 to 45. Those people traffickers know how to get people down. And we will publish research in the new year that shows, with physical video evidence, of up to 1,500 vehicles leaving Afghanistan with the support of the Taliban, who get paid a minimum. It's like $5 to $10 a head to go over. But these people are paying $1,500 to go from Afghanistan across to Turkey, where they then pay $5,000 to get to the French border, and where they then pay 5,000 euros to get to the UK. Big money for people traffickers, no deterrence for them, and a really supportive system for those asylum applicants and economic migrants who get to the UK.
I mean, the simple, harsh reality is that what you've just described is a logistical supply chain, very sophisticated, very well organised, and huge sums of money passing hands all the way along the chain. And if you just add up those sums you've mentioned, what does that add up to in pounds, shillings, and pence, in terms of what someone will have spent before they even set foot in one of the boats?
Well, before they set the boats, you're talking roughly around £13,000 for an individual. Now, some of them are well-off Afghans because we have funded their jobs for the last 10 years. So they will sell furniture, jewellery, etc. But what most of them will do is they will go into what's credit with the people traffickers. And that credit then forces those people into modern form slavery, getting under the system and repaying the debt over years to the people traffickers. Anybody that supports the asylum applicants coming into the UK without a proper assessment before they get here is aiding and abetting people traffickers to make millions and put these people into debt for years.
And no one's prepared to talk about this sort of modern day slavery. You know, you've got the woke left who worry about sort of our colonial past, but they're not prepared to face into the reality that modern day slavery is taking place up and down the United Kingdom because of this crisis, and you've just described it. And, to make matters worse, the ultimate offence to British taxpayers is that these people who've been able to afford, in a sense, give or take £13,000, are then given legal aid at our expense to fund their applications, which may go on for years and years.
Oh, absolutely. But that's not the only cost, Richard. For the first year, each asylum applicant that comes across on the boat costs the UK taxpayer $40,000 per head. So this is over £1 billion in the first year. These are enormous numbers, from the assessment of the people collecting them on the boats, the assessment of people when they get here, the medical officers, the housing, the food, the education, the health, the legal aid system. We've listed this. Enormous numbers.
Huge.
And 350 million for people traffickers this year alone.
Huge numbers. And of course, those numbers, Stephen, are going to go up if the number of arrivals next year go up. We could talk about this for a lot longer, but Stephen, time is against us. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Happy New Year to you. We'll be talking in the new year. That was Stephen Wolfe of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, talking about the cost and the numbers of migrants likely to come across next year in 2022. Stay with us. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Captivating, campaigning, controversial.
Reach for the story.
Radio with grown-up opinions.
Don't get angry, get on Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We're going to head straight up to Bolton, where Chris has got some thoughts. Good afternoon, Chris. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon, Richard. First of all, can I just say a very big thank you to you and everyone at Talk Radio for keeping me sane. And you can definitely 100% guarantee you will, if you put a candidate in my area at the next election, I will be voting for reform.
That's great to hear. That's a perfect New Year's Eve present for me.
You can bet my life on that. Well, there's just one thing that I'm struggling to get my head around. Well, according to Chris Whitty, the ever-cheerful gentleman, we could be in this for the long haul, the next couple of years, in and out of restrictions. But apparently, on June the 2nd, apparently, COVID's going to do a disappearing act, and we're all going to be dancing and singing in the streets for the Platinum Jubilee, which would be super. But the other day I was reading, I think one of the papers, probably the Sun, and we've got two articles right next to each other. Number one, the usual prophet of doom. We're going to be in and out of restrictions for at least the next 18 months. Right next to it, hooray, pubs are going to have their licensing hours increased for the Queen's Jubilee. So you've got two completely contrasting articles. So I'm kind of stuck between
The reality is, Chris, that in a sense, I think this is an ongoing battleground, an ongoing debate between the two sides, the pro-lockdown lot who want to control our lives, led by the likes of Chris Whitty, who, by the way, of course, now we need to call him Sir Chris, because we understand that he's being knighted in the New Year's honour list. So we'll try and remember to get that in to Sir Chris. But no, I think it's a real concern that you've got, particularly in other parts of the United Kingdom, apart from England, where you've got these utter control freaks who are looking to just maintain restrictions. I'm convinced it's part of a mechanism and a negotiating leverage to get more money out of Westminster. But it's dire, and yet we have to. And I think we were beginning to learn to live with this virus. But it requires leadership again, and that's what we continue to lack.
So on June the 2nd, do I organise a party, or do I organise my funeral wake?
Oh, definitely organise a party, Chris. No, we all love a party. We've all got to be optimistic. The glass is always half full, and I think you should definitely organise a party. And bearing in mind that it's it's essentially the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, then I've every confidence that any virus will show due respect and love for the Queen and disappear for a while. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Have a very happy New Year to you. I think we're going to Salford, where we've got Matthew. Matthew, good afternoon. How's sunny Salford? Where are you? Went to university?
Well, it's slightly overcast today, as is the norm up here. But thanks for taking the call today, Richard, and appreciate having the chance to chat to you. I mean, we've woken up in Manchester today some tragic news that a poor soul of a 25-year-old guy has committed suicide by throwing himself off a motorway bridge on the M56, which is obviously, there's never a time to hear that news, but it's Christmas, with the mental health issues that are becoming on people because of this pandemic. But then, of course, in the midst of hearing all that this morning, a friend of mine who's a psychiatric consultant actually in Salford, she's found out that she's going to be sacked in April because of the vaccine mandatory vaccines.
She works for the NHS, presumably.
Yeah, she works for the NHS. Essentially, she's mid-40s, single mother, 2 children, just taking on a mortgage, and then suddenly she's found that because she's actually made a decision herself, an informed decision that and I'm very respectful of everyone's opinion, pro-vax or whatever people's opinion is. It's a personal choice. But when we're facing, we're talking about the not overwhelming the NHS, but then in April, I'm sure the majority of people in the NHS have taken the jabs.
They have indeed. They have indeed, but we hear that we've got to protect the NHS because they're short-staffed, and yet they're literally imposing upon themselves an act of enormous self-harm by forcing mandatory vaccination on the very small percentage of their own staff who, as you say, actually have made their decision not to be vaccinated, for their own personal reasons. And I, like you, completely respect that. I'm pro-vaccine but pro-choice. And it has to be everybody's individual choice.
No, exactly. And, so when April arrives, obviously, we're trying to get the economy moving again. Obviously, we're going to really feel the pain of that in 2022 because things are coming back. The things are coming home to roost, aren't they? We're going to have to start paying the bill for all this help and these what restrictions that are now called protections, I believe. So it's like living in a twilight zone at the moment. Are we in a dictatorship now?
I think many of us feel that we have been in an authoritarian form of control and semi-dictatorship for many, many months, indeed, since this started. Thank you so much, Matthew, for those thoughts. My condolences in respect to that tragic suicide. It's always dire, and there have been so many mental health issues. Don't go away. Stay with us. This is, we're going to be talking about these issues ongoing. COVID is still with us. We've got to learn to live with it. Coming up, we are going to be talking about vaccine passports as part of COVID, and we're then going to be talking about the disastrous England Ashes collapse. It's Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It's the only place to listen to. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We are cruising into the third and final hour of my show. Coming up after that, we've got Christo at 4, then we've got Claudia Liza at 7. Now, just before the break, we were talking to callers about various things to do with COVID, and Chris Whitty, remembering, of course, he's going to be knighted, apparently, in the New Year's honours. And Nicholas, quick as a flash, says, did you say Sir Chris or circus? I think that actually is very instructive. It really has been something of a circus for the last 20 months, including in particular the imposition of the Plan B restrictions just before Christmas, despite the rebellion of 101 Tory MPs. And I'm delighted to be joined to talk about vaccine passports that have been present in Scotland and Wales, but were brought into England as part of the Plan B restrictions. So we're going to be talking to Alan Miller, who was the essentially co-founder of the Together Declaration, who's been working for so many people, millions of people, to try and prevent more restrictions. Alan, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for being with us. So, in a sense, short-term vaccine passports are with us, but given the encouraging news on the data about Omicron, in a sense, as was advised by South Africa, that it's milder, the cases are going down. Presumably, you've got great confidence, Alan, that the government will get rid of these Plan B restrictions and get rid of passports in the new year.
Well, they absolutely should get rid of Plan B and vaccine passports everywhere. In fact, it was interesting because our campaign, where we got over 170,000 signatories to lobby and speak to their MPs locally, we got over 1,000 responses from all 650 MPs saying that they're only temporary. We're saying, well, where's the evidence to say that? When is this date? It's a bit like the Coronavirus Act that's been used to implement various measures. And you think, well, where, like vaccine mandates, for instance, and where is the temporary nature of them? So we are demanding at this point that there's absolutely no need for vaccine passports anywhere. We know now, though, extensively that you can transmit if you've had a vaccination, and also that you may not have had a vaccination and have very high immunity. They're a pantomime and a charade, although they're very damaging. They're damaging to business, and crucially, they're damaging to our fundamental free way of life. That, in addition to having our next campaign, which is going to be very focused on no vaccine mandates. There should be no mandates whatsoever. In a free society, we should be able to engage, win hearts and minds, convince people of the efficacy of something. But particularly for people for the last 20 months who've been bravely serving and putting themselves on the line, to now be told that they're either got to have a jab or no job is utterly insulting and just seems like a dereliction of duty, particularly considering people like to talk about the NHS and the resource stretch. So we're really opposed to that. The two things are linked, vaccine passports and mandates, and that along with mass testing. The whole idea that you do consistent mass testing, talk about cases, they're not severe illnesses, hospitalizations or deaths. We need to get back to normal. And it's ironic, Richard, but never has it been such a radical cry to say that we want to get normality back. But anyone, and I think there are many people, perhaps a silent majority, who would agree with this, many of your viewers, that we really need to get back to normal now. From the point of view of the economy, family, education and everything.
There's no question. There are so many people who feel that they've done their bit, they've done what they're asked to do, they've been double jabbed, millions have been essentially have had the booster. People have gone along with it, but people really are waking up to the fact. Here we are, 131 million jabs later, somewhat more than the 15 million jabs to freedom we were promised a year ago. And we know that actually the vaccines, great as they are at reducing hospitalizations and deaths, they're not the end, they're not the way out of this, because they don't stop transmission and they don't stop infection and indeed reinfection. There's an interesting tweet I just wanted to run by you, Alan, which came actually from a guy called Gary, essentially disputing our view on vaccine passports. And Gary said vaccine passports have worked in other countries insofar as they've persuaded the vaccine hesitant to get vaccinated. There's real evidence for this in France, where there was a 25% increase in vaccine bookings in the week after Macron announced vaccine passports. So that's the alternative view. What's your thoughts on that, your response to Gary there, Alan?
Well, it's a perfect example of what the problem is. If in a free society, one needs to engage and win people over to a position, we've now witnessed nudges and coercion effectively, because people are saying, well, you don't have to take the vaccine, but if you don't take the vaccine, then you won't be able to participate and go to a cafe or a restaurant or a theatre. In Italy, you won't be able to get on transport. And in many places like New York, you won't be able to work even. And so the thing is, that's coercion. The idea that you have to take some kind of procedure, that you have to do that in order to participate in daily life, is absolutely unconscionable. I mean, as it happens, France had a question mark over hesitancy there for many reasons. And that's something to be addressed in any discussions around public health and how you want to do it. And I'm all for having an open discussion, but open discussions have to look at all components. They can't just be a tub-thumping one-sided narrative, because we've seen that online in many places, both with Ofcom and with other things on social media. There's been not only a reluctance, there's been a determined opposition and censorship to discussions about where there may be harm, what the questions are for young people and children. So open debate important, but it has to be a full-rounded open debate. And I would make the point that we've got a situation now where the vast majority of people have had these vaccine passports. But if you look in places where people are highly vaccinated and where they've had the vaccine passports, we've seen lots of transmissions. So what is the purpose for them? Even if they worked, though, even if it was the case that it stopped transmission, there would still be a question, and it would be a question of principle, that when you allow the state to start telling people what it should and should not do with its body, you're in very dangerous territory. No one would agree with that. Well, many people, the majority, the argument's pretty much been one that women should have control over their body at this point. The idea that, the state tells you what you have to do to be able to engage in everyday life is completely wrong. And that's why we ask people to sign the Together Declaration.org. And in the new year, just at the start of January, we are going to be campaigning and lobbying really hard. We're going to be putting pressure on local MPs. We're going to be engaging locally and regionally to actually have the public have their voices heard. Because I think, along with people like yourself, Richard, people that are around together, we've had some impact, certainly in this working alongside various well-known MPs.
But this is the battleground now, and it's interesting. Just whilst we've been speaking, another tweet in here from Angela, who says it's coercion and bullying. I know teenagers who've taken the vaccine for fear of missing out. But the issue now is, having got vaccine passports, once it's come in, no government ever seems to get rid of them. So they won't get rid of them in France. They haven't got rid of them in Wales or Scotland. When the evidence is they don't work, equally the politicians, the leaders in country after country across Europe and indeed further afield never remove them. And so it just becomes the thin end of the wedge.
Absolutely. I think that's why we're recommending to everyone to make sure that they keep letting their local MPs know that they're going to be voting on where they stand on this. We've had some MPs that have bravely stood against this, but we're going to remind them, like with vaccine mandates, that where you stand on this position, we are going to encourage all our signatories and everyone that we organise with locally and nationally to be voting on this basis and to put pressure on them there, but also in the media and across the board in society. It's unacceptable, this idea that Britain is going to get turned into a show me your papers society to carry on. Completely ludicrous. And I've got to say, right, I'm not one that is into various conspiracies, right? I just generally think that there's been a when in doubt, regulate, there's been an impulse, and when things go in a certain direction, people become obsessed. But you can understand why people get very, very nervous and think this is completely out of control, because this attempt to constantly impose restrictions rather than step back, rationally assess the data, the evidence. We're not even having this conversation anymore about evidence and data. Just before this, the Doctors Association are saying the NHS may be overrun. It was wrong for Boris to go ahead with New Year's Eve. It's absolutely outrageous.
Well, there was that great expression, wasn't there, that we all became rather familiar hearing, follow the science. Yeah. But it's quite clear that there's no scientific evidence anywhere in the United Kingdom, or that I'm aware of anywhere else in the world, that vaccine passports achieve anything in terms of reducing transmission. We've had another tweet in, someone who said, my 3 times vaccinated 24-year-old niece, after having been jabbed 3 times, got COVID over Christmas. Passport or no passport, completely meaningless. I just have this concern that these MPs, they're not going to get rid of these passports, and that before we know it, it'll be used as another health tool, another piece of data that they can sell.
Well, we've already seen that the government is looking at digital identification for all sorts of things in other areas, working from home and things like that. I think it's now time for the public, the great British public, in every nation within the United Kingdom, to really make our voices heard together and to put pressure on our local MPs and the government and to let them know. And so we need to get rid of them and kick them out and insist that they're not part of who we are.
That's right, Alan. Well, that needs to be everybody's New Year's resolution who is against vaccine passports. You need to write to your MP, meet them in the constituency surgery, make it very clear that it's a critical part of how you will vote at the council elections any time that you can vote for or against politicians who've supported vaccine passports. Alan Miller, thank you so much indeed, co-founder of the Together Declaration, and thank you for your work against vaccine passports and now also against mandatory vaccination. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking about cricket. Big sigh, because yes, another Ashes disaster. Anyway, stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. 21st century debate.
Speak once, think twice.
Talk Radio. Exhalation, conversation, confrontation.
Plain talking, common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We're into the third hour and we've been talking about a whole range of issues just there, talking about vaccine passports. Keep the calls coming in 0344 499 1000 and the tweets. But this next subject is a bit difficult for all of us because we woke up this morning to the news that for the third time in 3 tests in Australia, England have been well and truly hammered in the Ashes series, and that means that we've lost the 5-test series, and you know, in a sense, a catastrophic loss just at a time when we were hoping that there may be some improvement, that people might be getting into their form. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by a former England cricketer, international Ryan Sidebottom. Ryan, a very good afternoon.
Afternoon, Merry Christmas.
Well, Merry Christmas to you. Were you up all night watching it, or had you given up?
Do you know what? To be honest, I thought the inevitable might happen, and it did, didn't it? So I've got 2 children, so I didn't want to stay up too late and be shattered today, knowing that England were in a precarious position already.
Absolutely. I mean, it really, I guess for many people, it was sort of semi-expected, but the massive gulf that has been exposed, and it's always worse, isn't it, in Australia, in the Ashes, as opposed to here in the UK. But where do we go from here? Indeed, there's even suggestions that because of sort of COVID, they may or may not play the last 2 tests. Have you heard any more on that?
No, I mean, there's obviously been rumours, hasn't there, and sources saying that COVID is quite widespread throughout Australia, and it's obviously the players are in difficult positions with families and various, fans that like going to watch. So it's difficult, isn't it? I'd like to say that England, obviously, credit to them for going to Australia, and they've been in a bubble for such a long time. The last 18 months has been, credit where credit's due to the players. They've been in strict regimes, strict bubbles, hence why players have been in and out. There's been players resting, so they haven't had that continuity. But I think, I've said it on numerous occasions, I think it all stems from the county game and the domestic level where we don't play much county cricket. Our internationals don't play much red ball cricket because there's so many T20 and white ball tournaments that, when it comes to the nitty gritty, techniques and mental capacities have fallen down because of that reason. So I really believe that the ECB need to look at the schedule and see where we can fit in the county game and make sure that we have that consistency to help our test cricket.
Because in a sense, Ryan, there's almost like a real tension between the commercialisation of the game with the short form, the 2020, the one-day cricket, and this new tournament brought in last year, the 100, which obviously is putting huge pressure on the calendar and squeezing the time for the county game. But of course, the county game was losing money in reality. Let's be honest. And then, of course, in the short, the one-day games, in a sense, you're always on the attack, aren't you? You're not, as a player, you're not learning to defend, to sort of, to see time out, and that there's a real tension there, and I don't know what the answer is.
No, and I don't think a lot of us do they? Just because there's so much shorter format cricket now, and the fact that I think that Test cricket has taken a backward step in terms of, how much we want it, how much we want to focus on it. And again, you can understand because for the growth of the game and putting bums on seats and making money and wanting the younger generation following cricket, because it's an entertainment, we're in the entertainment business, the 100 and the T20 obviously is where it's at and people want to pay to watch. It's only 3 hours. But because of that reason, I think Test cricket has really, really suffered.
And can I just check? Are we playing a lot more short form cricket here in the UK compared to in Australia?
I would say so, but you've got a lot of our players now who, after this Ashes series, will go to the IPL and earn millions and millions of pounds, and credit to them. It's a short career, but I think, you look at the county game, it's April and May it's played. Then there's like a 3-month break and maybe one game, and then it's played at the back end of August and September when the wickets aren't great, it's cold. So you're not getting that continuity. And also now we're looking at players and talking about players that are brilliant at T20 cricket, but actually their averages are not great. So you can't just throw them in Test cricket and expect them to score runs and take wickets.
I guess if it's a level playing field where all of the great Test cricket sides around the world are all playing more short form cricket, then in a sense everybody's in the same boat. But if we're playing more short form than they are in Australia, and in a sense that's where the focus is, then you're going to get this huge inequality. And of course, the Ashes is in reality, it's the creme de la creme of the whole Test cricket game around the world, isn't it?
It really is. Test cricket for me should be the pinnacle of every English cricketer's idea of growing up and wanting to play Test match cricket. And then you shape the players around that, and they will still play shorter format cricket. But at the moment, I think, we've underestimated the fact that we've brought in a new 100-ball competition, T20 cricket. The younger players don't really want to spend four days, 90 overs, in the dirt, hard graft. It's difficult. Mentally, it's tough traveling up and down the country when, you can face 20 balls and hit 50 or 60 and be happy with that. So it's difficult. And I think it's down to the ECB to look at where we're at in terms of what do we really want? Do we want Test cricket to revive, to be the best, and then players to play shorter format cricket?
I mean, that really is the question, isn't it? In a sense, are we trying to push the sort of those of us of a certain age where, Test cricket is the absolute, the peak, it's the golden game, but are we maybe sort of missing the point? Young people, they want to earn more money, they want to get a result in a day. Maybe we're trying to push water uphill, and maybe we've got to accept that, in a sense, Test cricket is it's a nice to have on the side, but in reality, the real energy, focus, time and resource and bluntly money is in the short form cricket, and that's the future for cricket.
It probably is. You're totally right, Richard. I think that's going to be the case. But make sure that if you want in Test cricket and you want Test cricket to be the pinnacle, make sure that all players are playing regular. So you make sure that during the summer that all domestic cricket has the balance and the schedule is right. To get Test cricketers, and then you will produce better Test cricketers and better cricket. But yeah, I totally get it. Why would you want to work all summer and play cricket all summer when you can go to Australia or the Big Bash or the IPL and earn 60 grand for 2 weeks work?
Yeah.
That's going to be the case, and that's just how it is at the moment. So I'm sure it's down for the powers that be. We don't want to lose 5-0 in the Ashes.
No.
And we really need to do something about it and sort Test cricket out and make sure it has that longevity and people want to watch it.
My concern, Ryan, is the only way not to lose 5-0 is to terminate the series now on the basis of COVID and use that as an excuse.
Exactly, that's the best excuse, isn't it? Get us all home.
You won't like this tweet that I've had in, Ryan, from Andy, who says it's basically baseball and we're still pretty rubbish.
Yeah, you know what? Again, I think that's where techniques, just because there's so much one-day cricket, techniques have taken a backward step, and players now, it's almost is like baseball, stand and deliver.
Yes.
And that, you can't totally blame the players for that.
You can't. Ryan, thank you so much for your thoughts on
pleasure.
The state of the English Test team, Test cricket, and the disastrous Ashes series underway at the moment. We've got time before the bottom of the hour. We've got a quick caller, Peter from London. Good afternoon, Peter.
Afternoon, Richard.
What are your thoughts? Or are you going to put your name forward for the Test cricket side?
I wouldn't watch it if it was out in the back garden. Richard, it's just about going on about the COVID passports. Well, I don't know whether you don't mention it ever on your programme, but you should mention what's happened in the Republic of Ireland. In the Republic of Ireland, they brought in the pubs in July when they opened back up that you can only enter if you have a vaccine passport. There's no negative test, no nothing. Only people that are fully vaxxed can enter with a vaccine passport. Now, that lasted until last week. They're back to total restrictions in the pubs. And another one, the nightclubs opened in October.
Yes.
Only vaccine passports, nothing else to enter. They're back closed down till January, totally closed down. So anybody that says that vaccine passports work, just look at Ireland, and there's your proof.
You're absolutely so right there, Peter. I mean, we hadn't covered it, but the data is the same in the Republic of Ireland.
It's 93% of the population is vaccinated. You cannot go into a pub, you cannot go in anywhere without a vaccine passport, and they're all closing down. In the pubs now, they're back to restrictions, sitting at table service, masks when you get up, no sitting at the bars.
And what's the mood in Ireland about that? Are people waking up to the lunacy of it?
Yeah, of course they are, because people thought, like, once they got their jabs, it's the same as here and the same as everywhere, I think, that people thought once they got their jabs, we'll get back to normal, it's no problem. But now people are realising it's not happening, and they're going, hold on for a second, you promised us
there we are.
On this.
No, you're so right, Peter. Thank you very much for that. It's not happening. They don't work. Stay with us. We're going to go to the break. Keep the calls coming in. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
on Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice, fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio, standing in for Ian Collins. We're into the last half hour. Certainly the chat about the state of the England cricket team has got people going. One here message saying maybe England's current Test cricket generation is not up to the job, and the Aussies are very good. It goes in cycles. That's from Tim. One here from Ian in Leeds is obviously a massive Test cricket fan. Doesn't like the one-day game. He says talk of all 2020 is not cricket. The ECB has sold out Test cricket and they should resign en masse. That's certainly got people going. We've also had a few thoughts about what people have been up to over the Christmas period. I was very struck by some pictures in one of the newspapers about people who've had people over to stay, lots of friends and family, a bit short of room, and where people have been sleeping over Christmas in people's homes. And there's some great photographs of people in makeshift beds and mattresses and pillows and cushions. There were 3 people in one shower room, which was quite something. There was someone sleeping in the kitchen, right by the washing machine, the dishwasher, and everything. That's one way to do the washing up overnight. Under tables in the living room, right by the tree. Keep those stories coming in over the next couple of days, and we'll talk through them. Tomorrow I'll be talking about some of the best jokes or the worst jokes of the crackers. But we're going to go to Manningtree in Essex to talk to Richard. Richard, good afternoon. What would you like to say before the New Year period?
Well, good afternoon, Richard. Just wanted to bring 2 points to your attention. I don't know if you're aware of it, but 2 days ago I heard on the news, I couldn't believe it. It was early morning news, and I was really shocked. It says that COVID vaccinators could soon be turning up on people's doorsteps ready to jab you in areas with low vaccine take-ups. I Googled it, and it's all there.
Fair enough. I saw the same story. You're so right. I just thought it was utterly just bizarre.
I couldn't believe it.
I mean, it's like the sort of vaccination Stasi. Rocking up on your doorstep, knocking on your door at sort of 7 a.m. before you've had your cornflakes and said, take your jab.
I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I recorded it actually off the radio because they reported it a second time, but this time they named it as a trial area, Ipswich, Suffolk, which is where I live.
Oh, lucky Ipswich.
Yeah. And the other thing is, all these people that are proposing to sack because they haven't taken the vaccine, there's a proposal by Sajid Javid and Priti Patel to import loads of immigrants to fill those positions. I don't know if you've heard that.
I hadn't heard that. I mean, look, the point about the NHS staff is the thing that we've failed to do for years and years is invest in training our own doctors, our own surgeons, our own nurses. In a sense, we've gone the cheaper route, tried to save money by bringing in medical staff from all over the world, not just the EU. And it's a short-sighted policy, and it's really come back to haunt us.
Well, I can't understand what is the point in laying off these people that have obviously been in that position for years, well experienced and highly trained, and they're proposing to replace those simply because they won't be vaccinated by people from abroad. They're relaxing the visas, apparently. That was also in the news. And I thought, well, what sort of training will these people have? What sort of experience will they have? But whether they have or haven't, what is the point in letting vastly experienced people go to replace them with people from abroad? I don't understand it at all.
I don't think any of us, frankly, understand it. It just seems completely illogical. We should. No, you're quite right, Richard. Thank you so much for those thoughts. There's no logic to forcing people to leave. First of all, they already left the care home sector. I had on a chief executive from one of the biggest care home companies just a couple of weeks ago who was talking about the loss of his staff. And of course, many of them had made the choice not to be vaccinated. They went into the NHS for a few months, and then they're going to have to lose their job at the NHS. But there's just it's completely inconsistent. On the one hand, the NHS is asking us to protect them because they can't get enough staff. And on the other hand, they want to to lay off some fantastic, hard-working NHS staff who may be very experienced over a long period of time, who've put themselves on the front line throughout the whole COVID crisis, and that's the thanks they get just for making their own personal informed choice. I think it's wrong. I think it's appalling, and I still hope that there's time actually for Sajid Javid to change his mind, as indeed I hope they'll change their mind on vaccine passports, as indeed I hope they won't be tempted to go down the route of more coercion in respect of sort of mandatory vaccinations. And that comment there that Richard just mentioned, the idea of jabbers, vaccinators, rocking up on your doorstep, giving you the knock, saying, would you like a jab before breakfast? I think it really is enough to put anybody off their Weetabix, their cornflakes, or whatever else you enjoy. It's not the way we do things here in the United Kingdom. It never has been. It never should be. I just think it's completely and utterly wrong. We've got Lawrence in Milton Keynes on the line. Good afternoon, Lawrence. How are you feeling? Tell us.
I'm good, Richard, except I wanted to talk to you about the other side of this, the NHS staffing issue, which is that we, as one of the richest countries in the world, go and we plunder the poorest countries for their NHS, for their medical staff. So in poor countries, they train staff up, they get doctors and nurses and people to save lives locally and to deliver services, medical services where they are. And we come along with all our money and we just say to those poor people, come along and we'll pay you 10 times more to come and work in England, we'll give you a house and all that stuff, and they just fly off. And this leaves those poor countries in a terrible situation, and no one ever investigates that. You know, people say, oh, we wouldn't be able to run an NHS if it wasn't for all these workers from these other countries. We don't get workers from America or from Germany or from paid, sophisticated European countries. We go to the poorest countries in the world, and we take the medical staff, we bring them here, and they abandon the communities that...
You're quite right, Lawrence. The line's just breaking up a little bit, but you're so right. In a sense, it's what I was just referring to there. But the idea that, we, in a sense, we're getting the benefit of those staff who are trained at the cost of those, for example, maybe developing nations, and then we take them. And I suspect that there's no sort of cross payment to reflect the training that they've benefited from. I do think it's a really important point that isn't raised and addressed enough. I know, for example, we take quite a lot of staff from the Philippines, from Portugal, from many other countries, and it's a really good point. We don't take any, or very few, I suspect, from the wealthier developed nations, whether it's from Germany or America or the like. Thank you very much, Lawrence, for that. I think you've gone, but it really is so critical that we train up our own people. For example, nurses, very often, before they used to have to take degrees to become a nurse, they would learn the skills on the wards. And likewise, we shouldn't have a cap on the number of doctors we train. Completely the opposite. We should welcome more bright people who've qualified, passed the exams, and then I think we should actually give them an incentive. So for every year they stay in the NHS up to, let's say, 10 years, then actually you could reduce their student fees, their training fees by, let's say, 10% a year. That way, that's an incentive to motivate British doctors to stay in the NHS. These are such critical issues. We all want the NHS to succeed. We want it to be work. We want it to be really well staffed with frontline officers, medics, nurses, doctors, surgeons. But it's completely madness if everything we do, the government does, seems to operate in the alternative direction. Well, stay with us. Don't go anywhere. For the last segment of the show, we're also going to be talking about New Year's resolutions and smoking. Stay with us. You're listening to Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Talk Radio.
They can take away your opinion. They can't take away your freedom of speech.
100% more beat.
Smart people, smart thinking.
We say what you think.
Talk Radio, the home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio for the last part of the show before Christo at 4 o'clock. Well, I think it's fair to say, judging by the tweets that have come in, if any vaccinator turned up on most of our listeners' doorstep, they may not receive the politest of welcome. That is for sure. Another message came in by text here. We also lose some of our best doctors to America who are offered vast salaries to move to the private sector there. It is a big issue. The key thing is we've got to train our own without question, and then motivate and enthuse to keep them working for the NHS here in the UK. Well, it's coming up to the new year, of course, over the next couple of days. Give us a call or send us a message about what are your resolutions for the new year. And it's often a time when people decide to give up, whether it's to give up drinking or indeed to give up smoking. And I was particularly struck by an article that I read that suggested that people who smoke, teenagers whose parents smoke are 4 times more likely to smoke themselves and to keep smoking. And I'm just interested in people's thoughts on that. When you were a teenager, did your parents smoke? Did that encourage you to smoke? From my own experience, actually, my mother hated smoking. There were no ashtrays in the house whatsoever. And basically, we made it very clear, if we smoked, we really weren't welcome home at all. And we preferred her cooking, so basically we never smoked. But I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Hopkinson, Professor of Respiratory Medicine at Imperial College, to talk about this, smoking trends. Nick, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for being with us. So, do you agree with that, this article, this story that teenagers whose parents smoke are 4 times more likely to carry on smoking? And what do you sense is the trend now for smoking in the UK, and what more should we be doing, if anything, in respect of it as a public health matter?
So I think in terms of the story about the effect that parent smoking has on children, the evidence is really clear. So we've at Imperial College looked at data from the Millennium Cohort Study. So that's taking children who were born in the year 2000. And then they've been followed up for a period of time, and we looked at them in their early teens, so sort of 14, 15 years old. And there was a really, really clear message from that. So if the child's parent or main caregiver was a smoker, they were 2.5 times more likely to try smoking and 4 times more likely to be a regular smoker. And there are a number of other sources of data that have showed that as well. The Smoking, Drinking, Drug Use study in the UK shows the same thing. So there's not really any doubt about it. Why it's important, I think why it's being stressed at the moment is for the most important thing that people who smoke can do for their health is to quit smoking, and people know that it's bad for them. Mostly people know that passive smoking is bad and that you shouldn't, exposing other people to smoke is bad. But it's not so well appreciated that smoking is a sort of habit that gets passed, down in families. So an extra motivation to quit, if you like, will be, for some people, the idea of protecting their children. And
yes.
Of course, what's really important is that most people start smoking when they're children, and most of the people who are parents now started smoking when they were children. So that's where you've got an opportunity to take action and change someone's health for their whole life.
It's interesting, actually, because it does sound like common sense, but the sort of intergenerational passing down of the habit and in a sense, the addiction to nicotine. But actually, it probably had very little, I don't recall much coverage of this before, but it just seems logical. It seems almost inevitable. That's the way it's going to go.
So I think the key thing about it as a message is different people will quit smoking for different reasons, or will be motivated to try to quit smoking for different reasons. And different messages will work for different people. And this is something, as I say, that I think people haven't thought of so much. So it's if you like, it's a new angle that hopefully will motivate some people to make a quick attempt at the new year.
Without question, Nick, a bit pushed for time, but thank you very much for those thoughts. And indeed, as you suggest, I think New Year is a great time. If you are a smoker and you're tempted to give up, this is the opportunity. This is the moment. We've just got time for one call. Jane in Bristol. Good afternoon, Jane. What are your thoughts?
Good afternoon, Richard. I'm just wondering why we can't give these NHS workers an antibody test to see if they actually have COVID and are therefore protected, in inverted commas, because we're about to lose tens of thousands of skilled workers.
Jane, can you just speak clearer into your handset? We're struggling to hear you.
I'm sorry.
That's better.
I'm just wondering why we can't give an antibody test to these NHS workers, because we're about to lose tens of thousands of skilled workers.
I agree entirely. I mean, it seems madness to me. There's very little focus on antibody testing, and also they can test themselves every day, which I think is what many people have been doing anyway.
Absolutely. So it's just more, push. Get the vaccination, because that's, in inverted commas, the only thing that's going to see us out of this crisis, which we all know it isn't.
It isn't, absolutely. Jane, thank you so much for that thought towards the end of the show. That was Jane in Bristol with some suggestions why we shouldn't be mandating vaccines for NHS staff, with all the risks that entails, which concerns me hugely, over and above the damage that we've done to the social care sector by mandating that in a sense, care home staff had to be vaccinated as well, and so many have already left that sector. And the loser, of course, are care home residents, which means there aren't as many beds available, which means more people get blocked in hospitals, which means more people end up not being able to pass through from A&E, which means more people stay in ambulances for longer, which means more people can't be collected by ambulances when they're seriously ill. As I experienced in Shropshire, speaking to a constituent who was on the floor having had a fall for 13 hours. The knock-on effect of all of this, the unintended consequences, is absolutely huge. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show today. A huge thanks to my production team, who've been absolutely fantastic. We've been busy, lots of calls coming in. I'm back tomorrow and, of course, the following day. And it's remarkable to be able to hand over. This is a first, actually, because normally Christo on a Sunday morning hands over to me, exhausted after his busy 7 till 10 show. But now I'm handing over to Christo, who's just strolled breezed in with great aplomb.
Gay abandon.
How are you, Christo? Lovely to see. Have you had a good Christmas?
Yes, but I was berated by my mother for being too drunk on Christmas Day.
Oh dear.
Which is never a good look, is it?
Not ideal. But, that's what mums are for.
That is what mums are for.
Was she saying half a glass too much vodka?
You were right, it was vodka, firstly. You were absolutely right. She was just a bit judgmental. And I was turning into that quite annoying drunk person, knocking things over on Monopoly deliberately and things like that. I wasn't taking well to losing.
You were not behaving well.
I was
Are
not
you a bad loser?
Well. I'm a very bad loser at Monopoly.
What's coming up this afternoon?
We're going to talk about... I have so much to say today. Firstly, yes, Boris has done well to not put us into a lockdown for New Year's. But firstly, I think we should remember he's done it to save his own political skin.
Completely.
Now, I agree with him. I'm glad he's done it, but let's not forget that's why he's done it. He's not done it for our benefit or health.
No, it's all about him.
It's all about him. Secondly, let's not be grateful for freedoms that we are allowed to have anyway.
Quite right.
Do you know what I mean? I think that we've got to
massively.
be really
These
careful.
These are our freedoms.
Yes.
We don't have to thank anybody to have them back.
But we're also going to be looking more at Wales and Northern Ireland. We're going to have 2 bar owners, one here in the UK, one here up in Scotland, actually. One who has restrictions.
I suppose Scotland is still technically in the UK.
Yes, but you know what I mean.
May not.
We've got the political panel as well, talking about some of the big stories of the day. Boris, of course, facing this huge criticism for allowing New Year's to go ahead. We're going to be doing what we do every single day, the daily Omicron watch. We're going to be reacting to the 6 o'clock Omicron stats that come out, which don't seem anywhere near.
Nothing like as scary as Professor Neil Ferguson mentioned. Funny that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When's he going to be fired? I mean, when's some accountability for these people with their woeful products?
that actually it's not as it's much more mild. And we'll be looking back on the year in reviewing sport.
Huge show coming up with Christo. Thanks for being with me. Join me tomorrow at 1. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.